Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Watier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Watier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Doing fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation. This all stemmed from a very long podcast interview with Rhonda Patrick and Dr. Bikman, two people who I love to follow and listen to.
Powerhouses.
And yeah, just incredible. And it was tied to how to reverse insulin resistance through diet, exercise, and sleep. So I started listening to it. And as I got into it, it kind of really did more of a deep dive into the insulin matrix. So we're going to put a Fasting for Life spin on it today and how fasting pulls you out of metabolic chaos. So before we dive into that and talk about how chronic disease is an insulin problem first and why our Fasting for Life lifestyle and how we run and operate and our challenges and support and resources and how fasting can be such an optimizer to help you once and for all lose the weight and get off the diet roller coaster and eventually prevent or reverse these chronic diseases. So we'll frame that all out, but it's going to be a fun conversation. And if you're new, welcome into the podcast. Head back to episode 0, episode 1, if you want to give it a listen. That gives you a little bit insight into how powerful fasting was for you and I, Tommy, and why we do what we do week in and week out. Like we have a challenge coming up starting tomorrow. So it's not too late for 30 to 40% of our folks that join our challenges join now in real time.
Yep,
so
true story.
Come on in. The water's warm. Head to the show notes. Click the link for the registration page. It's got all the details, dates, times, frequently asked questions. If you need something from us, let us know. For you long-term listeners, just a shout out. Happy to be on this Fasting for Life journey with you. Thank you to the OGs for all the downloads, rates, shares, subscribes, rates, reviews. I don't know. You like us, you download us, so thank you so much. Can't believe 5 million downloads later that we're still doing this, and somehow we've still found new ways to talk about how to adapt a fasting lifestyle. So Tommy, let's get into it. We're going to frame today's conversation in a Fasting for Life way, but we're really going to talk about the insulin matrix and how fasting and a fasting foundational lifestyle can pull you out of a metabolic chaos that you might not yet be really being able to see on the surface or be able to manage. Because when we look at insulin and the majority of the obesity, chronic lifestyle disease epidemics that we have here in the US and across the globe now, 8 out of the top 10 reasons for all-cause mortality are insulin-related if you go far enough upstream. So disease and blood sugar mismanagement and weight loss resistance and cravings and it's in aging and all of this stuff, it's an insulin problem first and a glucose problem later. So what we want to do with our fasting lifestyle is create enough low insulin time for the body to shrink the overfilled fat cells, restore metabolic flexibility, and prevent or reduce or reverse, those chronic lifestyle conditions. However, after listening to Ben and Rhonda and going back and forth, I'm like, the problem we've been solving backwards is really what we want to look at. So if we're going to reverse engineer our way out of overweight, weight loss resistance, chronic disease, we need to reframe that through a fasting lifestyle. So if we look at it, we're looking at insulin as kind of like a Cold War analogy. Right? The news is telling you one thing, but quietly the troops are building on the ground. And insulin quietly climbs for 10 to 20 years to keep your glucose levels normal. So the whole like pre-diabetic 80 million Americans, blood sugar issues, weight loss resistance, yet to be diagnosed. Glucose numbers are in check, but your labs are off.
Could be pre-diabetes, where even the pre-diabetes isn't really like on your radar or your doctor's radar or necessarily even showing up on some of the more superficial blood work. because if you just happen to do a fasting insulin test during that pre stage, you might see the tip of the iceberg at that point, but not with the normal superficial testing that we do.
And by the time the glucose rises and those numbers are out of whack, the war has already been lost from an insulin standpoint. And this really connects to our modern food noise-filled, convenient, refined, processed, DoorDash-filled, like food environment is the way I want to say it that we have, and modern eating patterns where you wake up, you eat, you have dinner, you snack before bed. These like 14 to 16 hour eating windows. Now, if you're a fasting for lifer, you've already been working on compressing those windows, because that constant snacking and healthy grazing, even if you're doing it macro-based, calorie counter-based, nutrition-based, and you're having the meals plus snacks throughout the day, that means that the healthy grazing, right? That means your insulin is still high most of the day.
Even if you're in a caloric deficit too, and that's the real trouble, like with cognitive dissonance, because we think I'm in a caloric deficit, so overall over time the scale should be going down. But essentially at that point, if we're in a higher insulin but a low calorie environment, our body just shifts resources around. And then the priority is not to shrink those overfilled fat cells at that point. It's going to be pushing our biochemistry into fat storage mode. So even though we're in a caloric deficit, what that means is we have negative changes in body composition, we have extreme cravings, and then we can have issues with our hormonal health at that point that can lead to hair loss and other things that are symptoms
downstream
of
hormonal changes, thyroid, labs, all of that stuff.
Exactly.
Yep. So the thesis for today's conversation is our health is largely determined by how many hours per day your insulin is actually off. So what does fasting do to the actual fat cells? Because let's be real. I started fasting, standing in your kitchen years ago, asking you what you were doing because you looked great. I noticed the changes. I was like, well, I've done intermittent fasting keto before. It didn't work, right? But there was still that on-off mentality. So what does fasting and insulin, what does fasting actually do when you shrink that insulin state and that blood sugar elevation or volatility state? What does it actually do to the fat cells, right? In keeping a consistent floor of fasting, right? A foundational fast every single day. Well, the overview, we won't go too nerdy out into the science because Dr. Ben can do that. And then when I go to his metabolic classes, I'm still overwhelmed, even though I've been doing this for years and have the background in it.
Right.
And the letters after my name to say I should understand it fully. But just a quick recap, we've got two different things that your fat cells can do. They can fall into the hypertrophy or the hyperplasia category. And a hypertrophy category means the fat cells grow. So it's like a balloon analogy blown up to the max. So it's like when my kids are blowing up balloons and I'm like, okay, that's enough. Like, all right, that's enough. And then boom, it just pops. But right before it pops, it's unstable, it's inflamed. And that's where the insulin resistance comes into play. It's the dysfunction at a cellular level of your insulin signaling to and from the fat cell. Hyperplasia is more smaller fat cells or smaller balloons that we blow up that are more stable and metabolically safer. So when we prepare for a party, there's always one of two of those balloons that are in the hypertrophy state where we're like, oh God, if the dog even walks by that thing, it's going to pop. But if we can just get all the balloons, the smaller balloons built in a normal state, right? We're not bringing them to the max. Then we can have 20 balloons throughout the house and none of them pop. So here's how it connects to your fasting schedule. In a chronically fed, high insulin state or chronically stimulated insulin state, right? Even if you're in a calorie deficit, but you're doing the 3 meals a day plus snacks, you're going to push your fat cells toward hypertrophy and that spillover fat into your liver and muscle. In a fasted state, insulin falls, the lipolysis, the breakdown of those fat cells turns on, and those overfilled balloons shrink. So you're not just burning calories with fasting, you're changing where and how the body stores and releases energy, which is why we see such amazing change with adopting a foundational fasting and then adding in some longer fast, because your body starts to flip that switch. and those overfilled fat cells finally begin to shrink, which puts you into a better metabolic state. Does that make sense, Tommy?
Yeah, it sure does. And this is also the reason why, if you've ever, if you've ever done dieting, like calories in, calories out, and actually tracked that stuff, and then not had the results that you were expecting, which I think is will resonate with most of our listeners, then what some of that can come down to actually is the fact that because you were still in a higher insulin environment, even though you were in a caloric deficit, there wasn't the ability for your body to actually tap into the fat stores in order to actually shrink those hypertrophic fat cells. And so when that happens, what we end up doing is we're kind of sitting in a state of the messy middle. But if you've had some results whenever you were doing that, then you may have done it to a point where you were eating maybe the more perfect foods, or maybe a lower carbohydrate set of foods, so that you were actually able to get insulin levels low enough that you could tap into some of those long-term fat stores, even though you were spiking your insulin multiple times throughout the day. Those insulin spikes were necessarily small because of the food choices that you were making. So there are ways to make that equation kind of work, especially when you're younger or you're at a lower state of insulin resistance. But what we find is that type of method doesn't tend to work as well as we get older or into higher states of metabolic inflexibility or insulin resistance, right?
Yeah, so to land the plane on kind of the physiology beneath it is those hypertrophic, those larger full balloon adipocytes, they're going to be like 20 times their original volume. And oxygen delivery becomes limited, the cell becomes stressed and inflamed, and literally to protect itself from rupturing, the cell intentionally becomes insulin resistant so it doesn't have to take on more energy.
Wow. That makes sense.
Right? So there's a whole cascade of spillover that takes place when the fat escapes the fat cell. This is where we'll see fatty liver, impaired glucose production control. It'll get deposited into your muscles. There's a whole ceramide signaling inflammatory cascade that we won't get into, because there's the athlete paradox where they'll still have higher intramuscular triglycerides, yet they're going to be very insulin sensitive, because it's not the amount of fat, but it's the form of fat and how it's handled. So in insulin-resistant, more sedentary, fat is stored in that toxic configuration and that toxic inflammatory signaling, which proliferates that insulin-resistant state. So you can reduce your calories to start working out, and the scale might drop a couple pounds, but then you get stuck. So it's not that fat is bad or insulin's bad. It's just that the sick fat cells plus the poor turnover of that energy utilization drives the insulin resistance. That's why insulin is at the core of a lot of these chronic lifestyles. So it's not the weight in itself in your 30s and those 20 extra pounds in your 30s and 40s, but it's the amount of time that process kind of ingrains itself into your metabolic function. So in fed state with frequent meals, insulin's high, fat release is suppressed. You keep trying to shove more energy into the already stuffed balloons, worsening that spillover. In the fasted state, insulin drops. The hormone cascade becomes more sensitive. The breakdown enzymes turn on. You're able to tap into those fat stores, so to speak. And that especially visceral adiposity, so belly for men and lower abdomen, hips and thighs for women, you're going to be able to start to deflate those balloons and start flipping that metabolic switch more readily, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sure does. And
so,
go
ahead.
I was just going to say, the more times we do flip that switch, we go back and forth, our body gets more efficient at the biochemistry of producing the enzymes needed to flip back and forth.
fat adapted.
Fat adaptation, right? And so those first few times that we go into a longer fast, or we start to get into deeper levels of ketosis, and it may not just be a few fasts. This could be for weeks, or it could be for a few months of going back and forth, where every time you do it, it might feel just a little bit easier, but it might still feel tough. You might still feel like those keto flu symptoms, a little bit of lethargy, cravings can tick up at that point. It can be uncomfortable, but the encouragement there is that the reason why it's uncomfortable is because most of us spent years and years and years, or decades, just kind of locked into that mostly carbohydrate-based metabolism. And so without the metabolic switching and the metabolic flexibility, our bodies just aren't used to doing it. And so being able to kind of spin up and work up those the right enzymes very quickly, your body gets much more efficient at it each time you do it. And so that's the encouragement there too.
So when we're kind of talking through this, so why does that matter? And what does fasting do from an actual like physiological standpoint, and how it shows up in your everyday indicators? So the more flexibility you have, that switch between sugar and fat ketone engine, most of the modern diet recommendations out there are get into a calorie deficit, stimulate that metabolism. You're in that, almost like it shows up as like you get hangry or maybe even shaky if you go 4 to 5 hours without eating.
Yeah.
So that foundational fasting really gives your body's time to have the insulin come down, and the signaling kind of switches the so-called switchboard, flip the right switches. And when you know you're doing it right, you're going to have less intense cravings, fewer energy crashes, better focus in the late morning and early afternoon. These are signals or signs that fat insulin engine is actually coming back online. So that's why we're doubling down on this concept of foundational fasting, right? Not on or off. And that metabolic flexibility will build over the weeks to months. So some of the lifestyle levers that amplify this fasting effect are some of the things that drew me to listen to this original conversation between Dr. Rhonda and Dr. Ben. Is sleep, movement, food choices, and stress. So all of the lifestyle component things that either support or derail the insulin matrix that we've been talking about. Here's the big multipliers. Sleep, one bad night can mimic insulin resistance the next day.
Yep.
That's going to make your fast more difficult. So a poor night of sleep isn't the next day to be like, all right, I'm going to start a 72-hour fast. Because you're just going to be white-knuckling it.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with exercise. Movement, the post-meal walk. We've talked about this. It's going to blunt that blood sugar response and increase insulin sensitivity. Now, the biggest driver in this category of movement is going to be strength training. Because that's going to flip that's going to increase that blood sugar disposal and protect your lean muscle tissue while you're fasting.
Mm-hmm.
So resistance training, post-meal walks, movement early in the day, but most importantly, those 3, maybe 4, depending on where you're at, strength training sessions to really tap into that underlying insulin matrix that we've been talking about.
Yeah. So, anytime we have the opportunity to leverage the biggest glucose sink in the body, you want to take that. So anytime that you can activate, especially large muscle groups, and you can do that, and it doesn't take very long. So I think back to, last week's episode, thinking back to episode 311, just talking about the foundational habits, where you just go, you know what? It's so easy to say, I just don't have time for a full workout right now. And so you can kind of just get into the habit of just not moving in the way that you might like to do, just because you don't really have like 30 minutes or an hour and a half, and you can't get yourself over to the gym, or you don't have any equipment with you, or you're on the go, whatever the case may be. Do 2 minutes, do 5 minutes, do something with your body weight that you can do right now. You can do it in between calls, or you can do it while you're, take the steps instead of the elevator. All of these kind of things, they add up over time. So as long as you have that foundational fasting mentality, and we're kind of keeping that on the forefront, thinking progress over perfection rather than I'll just wait until I have the perfect opportunity.
So when we're talking about like the multipliers, right, or the rate limiting steps, so we talked sleep, we've talked at length about this, movement. We've actually shown those studies, Tommy, of those large muscle activation groups where, you can actually break up your movement into 10 3-minute sessions rather than one 30-minute session. You're still going to get the blood sugar benefit from it. So air squats, wall sits.
It's actually better.
It's actually better from a blood sugar management standpoint. Food quality is a big one, right? So we say this often. Fasting doesn't give you a free pass to just eat refined, processed, convenient foods in your window and go, hog wild on the all-you-can-eat buffet mentality.
Sure.
So that's why we double down on prioritizing protein, Whole food carbs, and this is something Dr. Bikman's big on, Ben Bikman's big on, is getting those natural carbohydrate sources. Your body knows what to do it rather than just those quick sugar hits from the sugary sodas and all the different options that we can. What's the word I'm looking for? Vending machine type stuff, gas station type stuff that we have. Healthy fats and fiber to support the satiety and the hormone balance. So really, your nutrition window for long-term sustainability of weight loss and then maintaining it, becoming part of that 5%, really comes into getting reps at prioritizing that protein and building your plate in a way that's satiating, fulfilling, exciting, and sustainable. The last big multiplier here is the stress and timing. So chronic stress with sleep disruption, no movement, poor food choices, right? You're just going to put in an allostatic load, a hormetic stress on the body. That plus, if you're trying to really do more extended fasts and you're in an aggressive fat loss phase, it's really just going to be a recipe for burnout. Mm-hmm. So this is where we talk a lot, and we talked about this on the last episode as well, especially with the summer, keepy uppy framework of, don't look back in August saying, I got to restart in September when you've had some great momentum through the spring. But we really want you to match your fasting intensity to your life load. And we talk about this so often in our challenges, which is starting tomorrow, in our coaching week in and week out. Most of our Thursday coaching calls talk about the lifestyle application or adaptation of it. But more consistent, lighter fasting in high stress life, when life's lifing, as we like to say, is actually going to benefit you greater from an insulin matrix standpoint and a long-term sustainability standpoint than always trying to just white-knuckle it and push the envelope from a fasting perspective.
Yeah, and that could also include the temptation to wait until you have the perfect time to do the next longer fast, because you can easily find yourself going, well, no, I'm not going to do a 14-hour fast today or a 16-hour fast today. I'm just kind of off. I'm just kind of not fasting today. But maybe later on in the week or maybe next week, I'm really going to, I'm going to push it. And I'm going to do that 48-hour fast, or I'm going to do that 72-hour fast that I've been wanting to do. Yep. But you would be so much further ahead just by doing consistent 14 or 16 or 18-hour fasts all throughout this week, rather than waiting until you can push it, right? It's again kind of counterintuitive sometimes, especially for more of a type A driver kind of personality, want to get it all done, especially if you have a tendency towards perfectionism, which can be tough too. Then just give yourself permission to adjust the expectations, not because you're negotiating down with yourself, but because you have an eye towards consistency rather than perfection. Yep,
absolutely. So what are the levers to pull to tap into the insulin/fasting matrix? It's really going to be your insulin-off hours, right? So clean boundaries, clean fasting windows, right? Not the little snack sit-ins or the grazes, but the goal isn't to punish you. It's to give your body enough time to pull energy out of those hypertrophic full balloon fat cells instead of your body trying to stuff more in. The food quality inside of the window. Prioritize protein, whole food carbs and fiber, not the liquid sugar and refined starches. Healthy fats. Try to remove the refined processed convenient stuff from your diet. When you do this, you're training your fat cells in your brain to handle the periods without food more smoothly. That's the switch analogy that we use. Sugar burner to fat burner, glucose to ketones. The last one is the movement and post-meal sync, tapping into the biggest energy reserve from a glucose management standpoint, your muscle cells. So 10 to 15 minutes of movement after your largest meals. Walk the staircase, go for a walk around the building, do some light squats. That's going to clear glucose from the bloodstream and lower the height and duration of the insulin spikes while adding in the resistance training 2 to 3 times a week. Your muscles are going to become a bigger sponge, which is going to require less insulin, which is going to tap again into that fasting insulin matrix that we talked about. Mm-hmm. And then behind the scenes is like the backdrop. We're going to have sleep and stress management. Protect your sleep at all costs. This is something that this is a mountain I will die on. Mm-hmm. My wife and I, in our marriage, we use this framework. Like, is this a mountain you want to die on? No? Okay, fine. Let's go. Yeah. Right? We're dealing this with my 4-year-old who's been in some swim lessons, but isn't yet comfortable swimming. Mm-hmm. I was like, yeah, we either need to put him into like the 4-week intensive when grandma and grandpa are here, or we need to get him one of those swim suits where, you strap him in with the arm things and it's got the thing around the chest. My wife's like, absolutely not.
Right.
Like, all right, that's not a mountain I'm willing to die on. So swim lessons it is. Right. But so sleep for me is a non-negotiable, and really avoid stacking your long fast on top of your worst sleep and highest stress seasons. Mm-hmm. Because that's when fasting works best with your physiology, not against it. So, Tommy, let's wrap up. Okay. If insulin resistance, as we can see, is the root of the chronic disease tree, then fasting is how we stop watering the damn root. You don't have to overhaul tomorrow. You just have to start stacking more insulin-off hours. Pick your window, no food outside the window, add the walk or the movement in dinner or your largest meal during the week. Now, do this for a week and pay attention to the 3 things: your morning energy, your cravings, and how long you comfortably go between your meals, between your fasting windows, in your fasting windows, I should say. Mm-hmm. If you start to notice those things shifting, that means that you're tapping into that insulin fasting matrix that we talked about, and it's beginning to change.
Yeah, you don't have to wait for the scale to move to get positive reinforcement, to get positive confirmation that you're doing things right and things are moving. So your body has to adjust. There has to be rebalancing that happens before the scale can necessarily move. So you might see a few pounds early, or you might not, but do this anyway, and don't look to the scale for confirmation of am I doing this right, or is it working, or is it worth doing? It's worth doing, even if the scale just stays the same for now. Changes will be coming as you get better at this, because you being at an insulin balance point within maybe a 12-hour fast, a 14-hour fast, even a 16-hour fast might not quite be enough time to really set the scale moving just yet. So do this anyway, because this starts to solve the much more important problems going on under the surface, and the weight change will follow.
Yep, absolutely. Does every time. So pay attention to your morning energy, your cravings, how long you comfortably go, or how comfortable you are during your fast. Maybe this week you want to track it. Go to thefastingforlife.com. You can click the link to the journal. And in the journal, you can track your fasting length, your food choices, your movement, and your sleep. Or just open a note on your iPhone. Boom, put it in there. Track it for just a week. It'll give you a lot of perspective, building off the conversation that we had last week about creating some actionable, keeping the balloon up, keepy uppy type mindset for the summer. If you want a more accelerated experience to set yourself up for success over the next few months, head to the show notes, click the link for the upcoming challenge starting tomorrow. Join us. We're going to have a ton of fun. I love the early summer, late spring challenges that we do, Tommy. We tend to get a ton of engagement.
Yeah.
And a lot of people just making some incredible changes. I think the average weight loss last challenge was like 5.2 pounds. Don't worry, we give you an off-ramp on how to do it as well. There's opportunities to work with us included. So going to be a ton of fun. Head to the show notes, click a link, grab a resource, do a little bit of tracking, but truly, let's once and for all put insulin where it belongs in the primary seat of focus, and tap into that insulin matrix once and for all. So as always, man, I appreciate the conversation, and we will talk soon.
Thank you. Bye. So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.